Welcome. Welcome to today's Dean's Forum and Hiram Thomas Book Event, a conversation among scholars from disparate disciplines on a new faculty work by Bruce. The author of the book that brings us here today is this very own Bruce Lincoln, our very own Bruce Lincoln, the Caroline E. Haskell Distinguished Service Professor Emeritus of the History of Religions, also in the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, the Committee on Medieval Studies, and associate faculty in the departments of Anthropology and Classics. Bruce, Professor Lincoln, Bruce. Bruce has worked on what he himself describes as a bewildering variety of topics. He is a PhD alumnus in the school, PhD in 1976. Bruce's work emphasizes critical approaches to the study of religion with particular attention to issues of discourse, power, politics, and conflict. Bruce is the author of over a dozen books, including Theorizing Myth, Narrative, Ideology, and Scholarship, which won the American Academy of Religions Award for Excellence in the Study of Religion, as well as the Gordon J. Lang Award from the University of Chicago Press. Our respondents today, our first respondent is Professor Ted Anton. Ted, the Carl Sandburg Award winner in nonfiction and a nominee for a National Magazine Award in reporting. Ted is Professor Emeritus in English at Chicago's DePaul University. He is the author of 4 books and co-editor of a 5th. He has also written numerous publications such as Slate, The Sciences, The Wall Street Journal, Lingua Franca, The Chicago Tribune, and many more. His books have investigated cutting-edge science, single-celled life, and the race for a drug to extend human health. Ted is the winner of the Carl Sandburg Award and finalist for a book award from the investigative reporters and editors for a book that's rather relevant for our discussion today. The book for which he won these awards and was finalist is a book entitled Eros, Magic, and the Murder of Professor Culianu, published in 1996 by Northwestern Press, and a book we read immediately upon arriving in Chicago in 2003. This, of course, speaks directly to our subject today. The second respondent, sitting over there to the far right, is someone you know very well, Christian Wedemeyer. Christian Wedemeyer is Associate Professor of the History of Religions in the Divinity School, Associate Faculty in South Asian Languages and Civilizations, Chair of the Committee on South Asian Studies. Christian is a historian of religions who studies Buddhism in India and Tibet. He also works on the history of modern scholarship in religion and culture and has a particular interest in the history of the Divinity School and Swift Hall itself. The author or editor of several works, so is Christian. These include a volume on the legacy of Joachim Bach and Mircea Eliade. He's the author of Making Sense of Tantric Buddhism, History, Semiology, and Transgression in the Indian Traditions, and this book received the 2013 American Academy of Religion Award for Excellence in the Study of Religion. This is our author. These are our 2 respondents. As is typical of our events, I'm going to ask Bruce first to stand up and say a few words about the book, and then Ted will first respond, followed by Christian. Then Bruce will respond to the responses, and we'll open it up for discussion. So join me in welcoming Professor Bruce Lincoln.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's nice to be back in Swift Hall. I've been told to keep this short, so I will try to do so. I'll begin with a bit of advice to colleagues who are about to retire, and that is to take particular care when you're cleaning out your files. I made a mistake at that moment in my life, and I pitched a manila folder that I should have held on to. The folder contained a set of papers that Ioan Culianu had given to Mark Krupnik the week before Culianu's murder. And he asked Krupnik to keep them safe. Mark had the office next door to Ioan. They weren't particularly close. He had no idea what the papers were. He looked them over, scratched his head, and held them safe, but really couldn't do much more with that. When I joined the faculty, we became friends. And sometime before Mark's death, he entrusted those papers to me and said, maybe you'll know what to make of them. I did. They were translations of articles that Mircea Eliade, probably the most important faculty member that ever taught at the University of Chicago Divinity School, had written in the 1930s. Most of them were articles in favor of an organization that went by two names, the Legion of the Archangel Michael and the Iron Guard. It was a mystical, fascist, homegrown Romanian organization that was virulently anti-Semitic, wildly anti-democratic, murderous, just a horrendous organization that he enthusiastically supported in 15 articles written between 1937 and 38. There were also 4 or 5 articles that Eliade and his most devoted disciples characterized as philo-Semitic. They were interventions on behalf of Jewish colleagues whom he liked and admired. The group of papers were meant to be an intervention in the ongoing debates about Eliade's politics, past, and scholarly importance. I read over them after Mark gave them to me, and I took them to be inconclusive. They were mixed evidence that I assumed his detractors would leap on, to accuse him of, horrendous crimes, and that his defenders would excuse as exculpatory, because there were no more than 3 or 4 sentences that really spoke to the issue of anti-Semitism. And they would say, these are regrettable sentences, but they're a tiny fragment of a huge work that shows no other traces. And at the time, I had work that I wanted to do, and I did not want to get involved in the ongoing, ferocious, inconclusive debates about the man who had been my dissertation advisor, my friend, my mentor, someone with whom I had extraordinarily favorable personal relations, and to whom I owed an enormous debt of gratitude, and whose work I admired for all that my own work had gone in very different directions, and there were points where I disagreed rather sharply with his positions. So I stuffed them in a file, and I put them in a file drawer, and tried to forget about them. And when I was cleaning my office, they went out with probably several thousand other files of no particular importance. And a few weeks later, I realized, oh my God, Culianu's last wishes included that those papers be kept safe and that something be done with them. And I've now botched the assignment that fell into my lap and my responsibility to a dead colleague. I knew Culianu somewhat. I can't say we were close friends. We were acquaintances. We got along reasonably well. I owed him also for some favors he had done me, and I was just guilt-stricken and miserable. And I decided the only thing I could do to make things right was to locate the Romanian originals of these articles, learn Romanian, which I did not know at the time, translate them, and make them available with whatever commentary I had to offer, and learn what their significance was. And I have spent most of the years since my retirement, pursuing that quixotic task. What I realized in the process, let me read the epigraph that I put to the book, which is something Eliade wrote in his youth that I felt gave me permission to pursue this task. This is from a work of 1935 titled Secrets. That which is hidden, he says, from the simple fact that it is dissembling, becomes a peril for the individual and the collective. A sin is surely serious, But if it is not confessed, it becomes terrible, as the magic forces provoked by the secret end by menacing the entire community. I'm not sure I would voice things precisely that way. But I do think that the secrets Iliada kept about his youth in Bucharest created a vortex into which all manner of people were sucked over the years. Culianu, probably worst of all, Iliada's wife, Christinel, his students, myself included, his colleagues and friends, and that vortex is a very uncomfortable place. I have learned things in the course of the research that trouble me deeply, both about Iliada and about Culianu, and about secrets. The book is my attempt to atone for my mistake in throwing out those papers, to make good on Ioan's last wishes, and to tell what I've learned in the process. I should mention that it was my intent to publish those translations as an appendix to this book. And in fact, the manuscript I sent to Oxford initially had 18 appendices that were about 3 times as long as the text that's ultimately published. My editor sagely said, I don't think this is a good idea. You're simply publishing your research notes. It's going to make a much more expensive book, and the copyright issues are going to be horrendous. And we fought about it, and he won. I have made those appendices available on academia.com and researchgate.net if anybody wants to read the translation of the Iliada text, the translation of Culianu's defenses of the Iliada, the critics of both, and a host of other things, correspondence between lots of people, and all sorts of documents relevant to this case. Let me stop there and turn it over to others, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Dean Robinson, for that introduction, and thanks to all of you for coming to listen. Thank you most of all, Bruce, for writing this excellent, important book and inviting me to respond to it. Your thoughtful words remind us of a shocking crime that never got the attention it deserved. Somebody got away with murder, not in a Bucharest alley, but in this building, on this distinguished campus in our beautiful city. Bruce suggests that Culianu's murder was connected to his desire to shed light on the past. Then, if Ioan Culianu is not safe, then no one who writes in a quest for truth is safe. Lincoln's book re-examines this crime, 2 lives, and the eternal question, how much damage can a secret do? Lincoln's book plunges us into the tormented world of the 1930s with reverberations that explain key events, I think, in our world today. Bruce knew the people in the story personally, and they're real people. We should remind ourselves of that. You did your research in multiple languages, and your dedication and sensitivity add depth to your analysis. The question seems to be who murdered Ioan Culianu, but the deeper question is who was Ioan Culianu, or Mircea Eliade. Both wrote scholarly works on religion, both wrote Gothic fictions that beguile us to this day, and both wrote political articles about events in Romania. How many of you could find Romania on a map? Okay, that's pretty good. Are there any Romanians in the audience? Welcome. Cu mare plăcere. It's a mountainous country on the border of Ukraine and the former Soviet Union, a borderland with a capital B, between East and West, between the worlds of faith and science, autocracy and democracy. It's long been oppressed by empires, first the Roman, thus the name Romania, and most recently the Russian. One historian describes it as, quote, undoubtedly one of the most tormented parts of Europe. For all of that, its people are very resilient, as my University of Bucharest students taught me. Their methods of resilience come through stories, magic, song, and poetry. Yes, Romania is home to Transylvania and the fictional Dracula, but also to great scholars like Mircea Eliade, who explain to the world the difference between the profane, our daily life, and the sacred, the eternal power of the stars. Ioan Culianu was much younger than Eliade, and when he was growing up in Romania in the 70s, everybody was under surveillance. Phones tapped, mail opened, and conversations recorded. He escaped in 1972, first to Italy and finally to Chicago, with the help of Eliade to this distinguished University of Chicago school in 1986 and 7. That same year, Eliade died, and Culianu became embroiled in the controversies over his hidden 1930s articles. So, Eliade didn't want these articles revealed. If that wasn't enough, at Christmas 1989, Romania had a revolution. Many people died fighting. I saw the bullet holes in the state-owned TV station. It is the only televised revolution in history. And I remember watching it on CNN, brand new cable channel, a bunch of mostly men, young and old, arguing against a blue background. The dictator, Nicolae Ceausescu, was caught fleeing with his wife, tried and executed. Many, like Culianu, argued in articles that a genuine heroic revolution was then stolen by those same secret police or Securitate who had been taping everybody's conversations and opening all their mail. By that time, Culianu was popular and controversial here in Swift Hall. He was in the process of writing 3 scholarly books. He taught a course on divination and told his students futures at parties. Many of them are haunted by this crime. To this day, his fiancée, Hillary Wiesner, a former student, fell into a deep depression, left academia to work for the United Nations. Another of his students told me very recently how he still suffers from the trauma of this shock. Lincoln's book is thus a timely and important re-examination of Culianu's relation to Mircea Eliade's articles. Few of us would have your talent and discipline to learn a new language, study a murky, hidden story of violence, analyze newly released documents, and hundreds of scholarly articles, and then write and publish a book. Eliade won many awards and was mentioned as a candidate for the Nobel Prize. But he never came out and renounced his past or dealt with his past. When his friend, Israeli Jewish scholar Gershom Scholem, asked him, Eliade replied with lengthy obfuscations that Lincoln analyzes. All Scholem wanted, a former student reported, was for him to talk directly as a friend and tell the truth. Eliade's conflicts ran deeper. He told Culianu if he won the Nobel Prize, his move was going to be to return to Romania after 40 years, leave flowers at his parents' grave, and at the grave of his beloved teacher, Ionesco, the fascist, pretty much the leader of the intellectual wing of the Iron Guard. Many Iron Guardists settled in Chicago, including Eliade's doctor. After the Romanian Revolution, their ideology was resurrected, as in Putin's Russia, often promoted by the secret police in both countries as they seized assets and power. In this tricky situation, writers were threatened and killed, quote, in record numbers, says the Committee to Protect Journalists about the situation in Russia. Ioan Culianu was threatened. Recently, a retired Chicago police detective from this district told me if somebody's being threatened and then they're murdered, the suspect is whoever was threatening them. Well, who was threatening Culianu? He told his sister it was Vatra Romanesca, a far-rightist movement led by Culianu's former teacher, that one secret police officer described as, for all intents and purposes, an arm of Securitate. Another group sending him letters was named for a Transylvanian nationalist that nobody remembers. The group, a German journalist said, was an invented Securitate organization. Lincoln reveals new facts and connects old ones into deeper context. He revealed to me, I never thought of this, that Eliade's motive for remaining silent might have been fear, guilt, shame. I didn't think of that, nor did I remember or know at the time that Culianu had handed over this file to Mark Krupnick. Lincoln tells us that Eliada's widow didn't particularly like Culianu, equating his efforts, tangled as they were, to understand her husband's hidden past with danger to her husband's legacy. I'll leave you with 3 clues to the murder and come back to Lincoln's book that I think are very important. He was murdered on May 21, which is his mother's Saint's Day or name day. In the Orthodox Church, your name day is more important than your birthday. It's your day that you're blessed with when you're baptized and your entry into the sacred realm. This is significant because every year in his exile, 19 years, he would send to his mom a name day card. And that would always get to her like the next day in Bucharest, where all the other mail was cut off. It was a way of saying, we're watching you. Secondly, there's the murder site, symbolic humiliation. Humiliation of the victim is a signature of the secret police. And finally, disinformation. Numerous Romanian news reports came out after the murder that the Chicago police had concluded there was no political angle, that Hillary Wiesner, his fiancée, was smiling at the funeral, had emptied their joint bank accounts. Bruce Lincoln and I disagree about who the murderer might be. Let me say, I don't care which of us is right, or if neither of us is right, or if both of us are right, which is conceivable. This is an unconscionable crime, raising a critical question: how much do words shape actions? Can I bring Culianu back? All we can do is try and understand and try to prevent it from happening again. Lincoln's book goes a long way toward those goals. It reveals the power of words to shape minds, to construct worlds, and trigger violence. In the beginning was the Word. Thank you, Bruce, for writing this important book, and thank you, audience, for coming to listen.
All right, thank you all so much. It's a great pleasure and an honor to have the opportunity here to make some observations and raise a few questions about my colleague Bruce Lincoln's latest book. It is a volume that has raised a lot of eyebrows and generated a lot of excitement insofar as, aside from a few judiciously framed remarks published after his famous turn away from the approaches of Eliade and Dumézil toward a more Marxian hermeneutic, Lincoln has maintained a fairly guarded and deliberate silence about his Dr. Vater. As he remarked to more than one person, he did not see the ethic in killing the father to whom he owed so much. As someone myself, who likewise stands in a complicated relationship to the research program of his doctoral advisor, I can understand that one would not want frivolously to cast aspersions or spill tea, as the youth of today would put it. For years, Lincoln did not speak or write on Lincoln, nor did he participate in a conference on him that the History of Religions faculty convened in 2007. And so now at last, Lincoln has broken his silence and engaged directly with the vexed legacy, political, intellectual, institutional, of his mentor. And people have taken notice. Immediately upon publication, as the editor of the journal History of Religions, incidentally founded by Eliade himself, my inbox was filled with offers from a range of excited Religionswissenschaft nerds to publish reviews of it, including some folks who figure prominently in the book's pages. It is a short, engaging book that tells a gripping story with a bang finish. Lincoln is a precise thinker, a diligent and dogged researcher, able to deploy a structural chart to devastating effect, and an elegant and engaging spinner of tales and arguments. As evidence of the latter, I will observe that when my pre-ordered copy of his book arrived around Thanksgiving, and I left it on the table by the front door, my octogenarian mother, a retired cardiologist, immediately picked it up and had it largely read by noon the next day. Similarly, I can recall my ex-wife, a filmmaker, likewise casually picking up Theorizing Myth some years ago and being charmed by Lincoln's authorly persona into digging further into the volume than she had anticipated. So for those of us who are dedicated aficionados, there was much neuronal salivation at the prospect of this contribution. What structural insights would this accomplished master of reading and cultural interpretation provide regarding the most debated and discussed figure in the field? one to which he had privileged access as his prize student and heir apparent. I emphasize Eliade here for the reasons I mentioned, but there are really 4 characters in the story Lincoln tells. Eliade, yes, but also Culianu. Indeed, the book is putatively about him. Likewise, the story of 2 other characters are hinted at, that of the history of religions as a field, and of Bruce Lincoln himself, whose persona occasionally emerges from behind the curtain into the narrative. Through these characters, Lincoln unfolds a chronology of influences and interventions that on one level aims at factual clarification of the past, yet inescapably, and it is here that the character, in both senses of the word, of Bruce Lincoln emerges, the tale is an ethical, even moral one, of the frailty of human character in the face of desire and ambition and reputation, even a kind of hero's journey involving secretly transmitted texts, dreams, debts owed beyond the grave, and a quest for something like absolution. The analysis of the Eliade character centers on the well-trodden debates around the extent to which he participated in the upheavals of early 20th century Romania, specifically its rightist fascist movements, the Legion of the Archangel Michael and the Iron Guard. I say this is well-trodden as there have been seemingly countless books and articles since the 1980s analyzing Eliade's writings from this period and after in relation to Romanian fascism, including comparisons with the similarly tainted legacies of Heidegger, Paul de Man, and the like. Lincoln's contribution here is primarily in giving a concise overview of what looks to be a fairly comprehensive corpus of relevant literature, on the background of Romanian politics and the unspeakable political violence it featured, which largely gets forgotten among the more famous atrocities of more cosmopolitan centers of contemporaneous Europe, on the clear evidence of Eliade's support for these movements as a spiritual struggle for meaning and destiny, and on the range of assessments of Eliade in light of his flat denial of any such involvement, from outright condemnation to acceptance of his evasions, and in particular to the gradual emergence of a more nuanced apologetic, granting some unofficial, youthful indiscretion, but insisting on plausible deniability. In my limited knowledge, the truly novel contribution of Lincoln's research is skillfully to highlight Culianu's central contributions to crafting and advocating this compromise consensus, and to detail the highly ramified international network of persons and interests that participated in negotiations around the emergence of that discourse. Strangely enough, as the story progresses, the Culianu character seems perhaps the most underdeveloped. It is the most tragic, perhaps, a young naif seeking self-realization through idol worship, finding himself remarkably successful at it, yet increasingly troubled by revelations of his hero's past and ultimately going along to get along. The sexiest part of the book is relatively unexplored, an explosive, if plausible, hypothetical solving of the crime. While Lincoln, with Culianu one half of a twinned son-disciple pair, was studiously avoiding any hint of killing the father, Culianu, it is suggested, for all his efforts to preserve the family reputation, was finally betrayed and murdered by the mother, Eliade's widow Christinel, whether by direct order or unthinking, distraught, "Who shall deliver me from this turbulent priest?" suggestion. The character of most interest in the circles I run in, where fascination with Eliade is waning along with his residual influence on research programs, is the history of religions itself. Given Eliade's undeniable primacy in discourses around that field in the last century, this is understandable. But as observed above, there is little particularly novel here regarding Eliade's fascist discourses and those of the scholarly field. The elements of his romantic fascist ideologies of new men and transformation of society and history through recovery of the occluded sacred are clearly outlined in Lincoln's presentation. But he does not do the work for the reader of connecting that in detail to its later articulations in The History of Religions and a New Humanism, the editorial program of the History of Religions Journal, or other formative works in the field. Here too, though, like the political entanglements of the young Eliade, his later scholarly ideology is fairly well explored in prior works. making the intervention by Lincoln somewhat familiar. In the narrative constructed by Eliade and so many others, the primary challenge for humanity is the anomie brought on by the accelerating change in modern social, political, economic, demographic, and yes, religious spheres. This anomie, or instability in cultural reference or plausibility structures, is characterized as a breakdown of meaning. The modern social sciences and much of the humanities developed in large part in response to the social and economic disruptions generated by accelerating technological and cultural change, and Eliade sought to locate a contribution to this problem in the history of religions, recapitulating in the process solutions essayed in his Romanian writings. It does not, however, seem to me that one may object to Eliade's influence on the course of researches in the field based primarily upon alleged or even proven right-wing political tendencies of Eliade's creative or total hermeneutics. Many volumes have already seen the light on fascism and the study of religion, its relationship to perennial philosophy, programs of hidden meaning, etc. It does seem to me that much of this feature of the field is politically ambivalent. After all, the same basic critique of the status quo of modern society as soulless materialism unmoored from values is likewise a stock in trade of some of the political left. They just seek other sources for a restoration. The response need not be a nativist reaction. It were and is also an option to advocate other forms of rejection or return. The United States has excelled in back-to-the-land intentional communities, and later hippie communes that sought meaning in organic gardening, crafts, whole foods. In India, Gandhi's ashrams, with their rejection of the disruptions of the industrial economy and deliberate turn toward obsolete technologies like the spinning wheel, are likewise elements of reaction, but not one with the features of a nativist reaction with violent consequences. What is more distressing, albeit also much investigated, is the sloppy scholarship that seeking of meaning brings in its wake. Already in 1982, Ivan Strensky, quoting Eliade himself, observed that creative hermeneutics, so-called, involves, quote, seeing signs, hidden meanings, symbols in the suffering, the depressions, the dry periods of everyday life, seeing them and reading them even if they aren't there, unquote. As Eliade continues, quote, if one sees them, one can build a structure and read a message in the formless flow of things and the monotonous flux of historical facts, unquote. As he wrote in his journal, quote, I believe that modern man has discovered in my books a dimension of cosmic sacredness which is neither a lyric creation nor a philosophic invention, unquote. One that made many consider him, he complained with ill-concealed satisfaction, the, quote, guru of America, unquote. But succeeding generations, even already the boomers, have seen through the pretensions of the cosmic to the lyric and the philosophic. So again, it is not at all clear to this reader what new insights or imperatives this book contributes to understanding the constitution or historical development of the study of religion as an academic field. My sense is that it does not try to be that. And besides, who am I to complain? No book can be all things to all people, and goodness knows Lincoln has already given readers more than plenty to think about in this regard. This leaves the character of Bruce Lincoln. As I mentioned, there is a curious twinning aspect of the Culianu and Lincoln characters that is left undeveloped, perhaps rightly so by this author. But what might it mean for the field, or Eliade or Culianu, to have such a doubled legacy? Very much like the common feature of lineage histories and struggles in Japan and Tibet, we are faced here with something like two sons. Typically, this is the son of the founder as opposed to the most talented disciple. Milarepa versus Dharmadode in 11th century Tibet, or Koichi Tohei versus Kishumaru Ueshiba in 20th century Japan. Who takes over the transmission of the teachings? Here, Culianu, as a son of Romania, who followed Eliade's footsteps on his journey from there to Italy, through Paris to Chicago, would seem to be the natural son, destined to inherit by familial relation, and Culianu did much to suggest himself in this capacity with some success. Lincoln, by contrast, is the best disciple, an intellectual heir, though, as often happens in such stories, marred by some heterodoxy incident upon their talents, not merely repeating or reproducing, but advancing. This hypothetical narrative subtext aside, this book suggests elements of a further self-mythologization of the persona Bruce Lincoln on a hero's journey of cultural interpretation. Here we see a favored disciple transmitted an obscure occult treasure text that calls for interpretation, the dossier of Romanian articles given to Krupnik, lost by him, recovered, lost again by Lincoln, and recovered again. That is the typical period of mythic latency, loss recovery, a further journey of visionary recovery independent of the transmitted volume, studying Romanian and retranslating them. We hear, too, of portentous dreams that compelled the revelation and exegesis of this occulted text. What, we might ask, is the outcome of this journey, its cash value, as it were? Is it only a personal redemption of obligations beyond the grave to Krupnik, Culianu, Eliade himself, and ultimately to the young, idealistic Bruce Lincoln who put the Romanian apologist for the Legion on a pedestal? In light of the idea of killing the father, is there a Freudian interpretation to be sought? Is this book's project somehow the return of the repressed? If so, what do we see of the creative work that is expected to be so generated? Was all the immensely creative and disciplined semiological analysis of religion Lincoln generated in his mature career the dream work that resulted from his principled stance not to kill but repress the father that he maintained from the mid-1980s to the present? And if the repressed has returned, what remains for Bruce Lincoln? In a poem he wrote on and for Eliade, dated the day before my 7th birthday in 1976, Lincoln suggests that Eliade, puffing a pipe in his bookish study and reflecting on the wisdom of the ages, is like the Maori elders, whom the Maori youth, pining after the baubles of modernity, leave to puff their pipes while their traditional knowledge and practices stagnate and pass with the passing of the elders. Significantly, they puff their pipes contentedly. The poem's key move is the pairing of this image with that of Eliade, similarly puffing a pipe, stressing that the wisdom Eliade gleaned from his vast library of the Maori and others was, quote, passed on to his sons, unquote. If so, what remains? And for whom? Lincoln? Culianu? Us? I can't conclude without drawing some attention to the book's notably ethical title, speaking as it does of consequences. This is a book that reveals a deep ethical commitment, a feature which most will know to be central to Lincoln's personal formation, but may not know quite how to reconcile with his scientific commitments. For someone who has for years loudly, if implausibly, disclaimed any knowledge or interest in philosophy or ethical reflection, Bruce Lincoln is one of the most committedly ethical scholars that I have ever known. Like Edward Said, who claimed that the critic should be, quote, constitutively opposed to all forms of tyranny, domination, and abuse, unquote, Lincoln likewise has a keen appreciation for the situation of history's underdogs and for inconvenient truths. Whether ultimately this book's main lessons be judged largely personal or more global, it will remain a testament to the remarkable character of one of the greatest scholars and gentlemen our field is ever likely to know. Thank you.
I would like to thank Bruce, thank Ted, thank Christian, and invite you to share my gratitude for their presence today. Thank you.